All this from a system that's not bringing returns to the people of BC. 80 sawmills closed since 2000, and I think even more. Canfor just shut down, what, 3 mills and curtailed production in another. Over 55,000 direct forestry jobs lost since 2000. Less than 2% of jobs provided by forestry. Less than 2% of the GDP provided by forestry. And it's costing BC taxpayers $365 million annually to support the forest industry. The new Forest Act is founded in principles that provide a system that, under Priority 1, preserves and restores natural ecosystem integrity and resilience. Under Priority 2, gives Indigenous peoples and BC residents a say in what happens in the forest ecosystems that affect them. Under Priority 3, it builds stable community-based jobs and local economies that strengthen the larger BC economy. I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey, myself, and then I'm going to spit some ugly facts, and then I'm going to talk about the new Forest Act proposal. All right, so I moved to Grand Forks in 2016, and things were going nicely. And then in spring of 2017, my house flooded along with about 24 others. So that year, that was 2017, I had about 1.5 feet of water in my house. And then in spring of 2018, the most catastrophic flood that BC had ever experienced up until that point, hit Grand Forks. And about 400 homes and most of the downtown businesses, along with farms and ranches in the area, were hit. So this is me. In my house in 2018, I had built a 3-foot wall of sandbags around my house. I ended up with 4 feet of water in the house. And so this is me showing the CTV guy how much water was in my house. The water upturned the fridge, spilled out all the contents. So I wanted to find out why it happened. So someone referred me to forest ecologist Herb Hammond, who lived just over the mountains in the Kootenays. And he showed me an aerial photo of the Kettle River watershed. So the Kettle River watershed is a sparsely populated 8,000 square kilometer mountainous zone, and it's mostly crown land. And he pointed to the gray blobs on this photo, or a similar photo, and he said, those are all clear cuts. And I knew. So over the next 2 years, I got together with other concerned locals, including retired loggers, and we formed the Boundary Forest Watershed Stewardship Society to address the negative impacts of forestry in our region. And I also traveled the province, and I listened to scientists and residents and politicians and foresters, and I learned that there are hundreds of groups like ours trying to protect our communities and nature from the negative impacts of industrial forestry. So there are a lot of dedicated folks volunteering to make things better for forests and people. I think a lot of you guys in here know each other already, but before I go any further, I want you to look around the room and pick somebody that you have never met before today. And some of you can move and some of you can't, but if it's easy for you to move, pick somebody, look them in the eye, go sit by them for 60 seconds and tell them your why. Go. You've each got 60 seconds to tell them your why. Why are you trying to conserve and protect forests? That includes our speakers. Pick someone you've never met before. 60 seconds. Evan, this fellow right here. Do you know each other? There's going to be lots of time for more conversation at the end. We're officially finished at 3:30, but you guys and we can hang around a little bit longer and chat, because that's where the action happens, right? Personal chatting. In 5 words or less. So my why is my town got flooded. What's your why? Put your hand up. 5 words or less. Yes.
I want to break the myth.
You want to break the myth. All right. Who else? Yes.
Nature is its own thing on its own and deserves protected. Some more than 5 words.
Nature is its own thing on its own and deserves to be protected. Yeah.
Forest is our past, our present, and our future.
Forests is our past, our present, and our future. Yeah.
I have a multitude of reasons, but among them is the fact that I work for some small communities, one of which was largely wiped out by fire last summer, and another seriously threatened by fire this summer.
Fire is wiping out communities. What else? Yes.
I want our grandchildren to enjoy healthy forests and wildlife diversity.
You want your grandchildren to enjoy healthy forests and wildlife. All right. Anybody else? Yes.
It's 7 words. Be the change you want to see.
Be the change you want to see. All right.
And corporate capture.
Corporate capture. And corporate capture. Dum, 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 dum. Okay. So since 2018, the disasters have multiplied and the damage from industrial forestry continues. Decades of overcutting from industrial logging have resulted in enormous losses of primary forests in BC. Michelle showed a close-up of this, their map. So this is, the green is what's left of primary forests in British Columbia. Between 2001 and 2019, logging accounted for 3.9 million hectares of forest cover loss in the province. And when compared with most forested nations on a per capita basis, BC's record of total forest cover loss is by far the worst. In addition to monetary costs, industrial forestry has taken its toll on people, wildlife, and ecosystems. And the damage has been studied, examined, photographed, and published by hundreds, possibly thousands of scientists, journalists, and residents. We've got 2 documents that we're putting out. It's on our website. I'll show you the web address again. We've got our Forest Act proposal, which is, I think, about 25 pages. We've got our backgrounder document, which is about 25 pages. So in our backgrounder, I go into details of some of these costs. I'm just going to summarize a few here. In 2021, BC was beset by 3 extreme weather disasters, an unprecedented heat dome, devastating wildfires, and an atmospheric river and flooding. A study found that the cost to BC's economy from these events are estimated to be between 10 million and 17 billion. 2023, wildfires in the Shuswap and Okanagan caused more than 720 million in insured losses, making it BC's costliest event ever. BC's budget for fighting wildfires doubled. From 2010 to 2014, it was 1 billion. Between 2015 and 2019, it was 2 billion. There's been a massive increase in fires in all areas of the province except for Vancouver Island over the past 10 years. And the escalation in the southern interior of BC is particularly shocking. The red bar right here. So BC is suffering from more fire, more floods, and more drought. And the BC government likes to blame global climate change for the increase. However, the increase in the frequency and magnitude of these disasters and extreme weather events, although yes, in some ways it is linked to global climate change, it can also be directly and indirectly linked to industrial logging. The science has been done and it continues to be done. So most recently, we've got the Chilcotin slide. In our Vancouver presentation, Dr. Eunice Alila talked about the connection between cumulative effects of forestry and the Chilcotin slide. So his talk is titled, "What in the Hell Caused the Chilcotin Slide?" We're going to send that recording out to everybody. If you signed up with us, you'll get the email. And then we've got the ecological devastation. Degradation of water, including decreased water quality and supply for community watersheds, agriculture, and for forests. We've got the degradation of soil, including moisture and nutrients. We've got the degradation of watershed hydrology. We've got a loss of biodiversity. We've got local extinction of species. We've got Canada's greenhouse gas emissions from logging, which are higher than that from oil sands. And then we've got the loss of climate moderation. And all this from a system that's not bringing returns to the people of BC. Herb mentioned a few of these things. 80 sawmills closed since 2000, and I think even more. Canfor just shut down, 2, 3 mills and curtailed production in another. Over 55,000 direct forestry jobs lost since 2000. Only less than 2% of jobs provided by forestry, less than 2% of the GDP provided by forestry, 1.7 billion in expenses for the government, and Herb mentioned this too. David Broadland crunched the numbers, and it's costing BC taxpayers $365 million annually to support the forest industry. And at the root of these problems is the provincial legislation which protects private interests. So when I traveled and I talked to people, I noticed that's where the gap is. So all of these people in their individual communities working on changing forestry in their region. And all the work that these people are doing is very, very important. But it didn't seem like anybody seemed to be working on changing the forestry legislation that's the root of the problem for all of us. And nothing changes until the legislation changes. We know that unlogged primary forests have a moderating effect on climate, floods, and heat. We know that we need to conserve them and restore previously logged areas in order to ensure our very survival. Herb and Michelle talked about this. In light of all that's happening, that's not an exaggeration. Our laws must preserve the power of forests and all the benefits for which we value them. So the provincial government may not be able to control the global climate, but it can control logging on public land in British Columbia. And this requires a replacement of the current legislation. And I talked about this more when we were on Vancouver Island, because Vancouver Island logging is more on private land. It can also affect what happens on private land, and the Kootenays would be interested in this as well, because there's more private land in the Kootenays. So what we've got now is legislation that's based on an outdated paradigm. The new Forest Act will be based on a new paradigm of ecological management. So in the middle there, we've got all of this outdated industrial paradigm stuff, where the dominant value is timber supply and profits. And those are the objectives as well. The policy influencer is private interests. The business model in the market are large, quite often multinational corporations, and it's monopolistic. The outcomes that they are seeking are a high volume of production. The products are raw logs, dimension lumber, fiber, and a big concern around here, pellets. Decision-making is centralized. Silviculture focuses on tree farms. Herb talked about the damage that tree farms are doing to BC ecosystems. The logging method, most of the time it's clear cutting, where they're removing all the parts and pieces and destroying or interfering with the processes, and sometimes they call it different things, right? What else are they calling clear cutting these days? Michelle, what are some of the terms you've heard? Clear cutting with reserves.
Creating future old growth.
Creating future old growth? Okay, good. Okay, they haven't gone that far. Okay.
There's like recruitment. It's old growth recruitment.
Old growth recruitment. Okay.
Forestry term that they use when they log something and then set it aside to not be logged in the future, so that it will become old growth in the future.
Okay, so they leave a little patch and they're saying they cut it.
And then they say we won't cut that part again ever.
Oh.
It can become old growth.
We won't cut that part again ever, so it will become old growth. Retention. All right, so a lot of jargon and doublespeak. All right, it's clear cutting. All right, and then here in this row here, we've got the new paradigm based on ecological principles. The dominant value is nature's needs. The objectives are ecological integrity and resilience. The policy influencer is the public interests. The business model and the market are small to medium-sized local businesses and a competitive open market. Outcomes are a high value of products, and the products themselves from forestry would be value-added wood products. And the other products would be non-timber forestry products. What are some non-timber forestry products? Mushrooms. What? Berries. What else?
Medicinal
Medicinal plants, yeah. Recreation, mental health, wildlife, cultural sites,
Drinking water.
tourism. Bear? Air. Air. All right. Decision making, decentralized and community centered. Silviculture. It's about biodiverse species and conserving primary forests. The logging methods, well, sometimes it goes by different names. I think we should talk a little bit more about partial cutting because Herb's here today and he can help us to define that. But whatever logging is done and where it's permitted should be constrained by nature's needs. The industrial paradigm and corporate control are deeply woven into BC forestry legislation and policies which are complex. Under the current provincial legislation, tenures held by corporations are protected. Professional reliance is written into policies and operations, and unfortunately, I see a lot of local politicians who defer to industry on every question. Corporations are left to monitor themselves, and there are no significant consequences for companies that are degrading the land or eliminating local jobs. A little slap on the wrist, little recommendation from the Forest Practices Board. So it's no wonder that tenure holders have no motivation to shift from an industrial paradigm to an ecological paradigm that would benefit nature and communities. We're not going to get anywhere by chipping away at the forestry legislation one policy at a time. It's too deeply ingrained. It's time for a strategic shift, a complete restructuring through a new Forest Act. Here's what we're recommending. So to start with, the tenure system will be eliminated. Here comes the hate. There will be no buyback of tenures from companies. More hate coming my way. They've been sufficiently compensated over the years with enormous profits and subsidies from taxpayers. The people of BC do not owe them anything more. So let's look at how to transition. The current Forest Act has to be repealed, and this means that all licenses will be dissolved. And there's a mechanism within the current Forest Act to do that at the 5-year renewal time of every license. And so depending on the term of each license, the transition period would be from 1 to 5 years. And this would give the forest industry and communities time to transition and adjust. It would also provide the government with the mechanism to achieve an orderly shift, both economically and administratively. These are the acts that must be repealed. I'm not going to specify them. The new Forest Act must also include a specific regulation for the Private Managed Forest Land Act that concerns people mostly on Vancouver Island and in the Kootenays. So the same principles of nature-directed stewardship as proposed for public land would apply to private land. I'm going to talk about that NDS, nature-directed stewardship, in a moment. The Water Sustainability Act should not be repealed, but should be fully implemented by completing its regulations, specifically for the Water Sustainability Planning Regulation. This is a powerful piece of legislation that was never enacted and would fully support the new Forest Act that we're recommending. Now, a new Forest Act will be a complex piece of legislation. It'll be written by government lawyers and legislative experts working on behalf of the BC public and Indigenous peoples. So we've identified 3 key priorities that must be the basis of the new legislation. And the intention is that the principles, standards, and structures delivered in our proposal and our backgrounder will be augmented and developed by public servants using the appropriate legal language and legislative mechanisms. The new Forest Act is founded in principles that provide a system that, under Priority 1, preserves and restores natural ecosystem integrity and resilience. Under Priority 2, gives Indigenous peoples and BC residents a say in what happens in the forest ecosystems that affect them. Under Priority 3, it builds stable community-based jobs and local economies that strengthen the larger BC economy. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on these priorities, but again, there's a lot more detail in our documents. First, I want to make it clear that these are living documents, and they will be expanded and refined from feedback as we go along with this project. Priority 1, ecosystem integrity. The first and overarching priority is to enshrine in law that all forestry decisions are based on ecosystem and conservation science, plus indigenous knowledge rather than timber supply considerations. The preservation of ecosystem integrity is an umbrella priority that applies to everything else that comes after it. So look at the little umbrella there, and I'm gonna come back to this when we talk about tourism. Top goals for priority number 1, safeguard people from hazards such as floods, fires, drought, and climate change by preserving nature's capacities for protection and mitigation. To enable nature to continue to provide the ecosystem services, sometimes called benefits, that humans need for survival. Nature-directed stewardship is the foundation for the new Forest Act. Herb Hammond talked quite a bit about nature-directed stewardship. So for those of you who are watching the recording, I am going to link Herb's talk in the video. Nature-directed stewardship recognizes that successful human economies are dependent on thriving natural ecosystems. So ecological, cultural, and economic needs can be met by basing management activities on NDS, nature-directed stewardship. Here are just a few key elements of NDS. Herb went into more detail. So biology and ecology are put ahead of politics and short-term economic considerations. Timeframes are 250 to 500 years and beyond. It incorporates the indigenous concept of building a reciprocal relationship with nature. So take no more than you need, and we give back by ensuring that ecological integrity is maintained. People cannot make demands on ecosystems that exceed their biological or physical limits. NDS produces different outcomes. So it preserves the value of landscapes, ecological, wildlife, water, clean air, climate moderation. It preserves community jobs, and it uses different logging methods to produce different outcomes. Logging activities can continue in one zone, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but the methods are aligned with the standards and principles of NDS, and they're limited to a specific zone, And that's one of the keys here, is the outcomes. So industry can hijack language, and they can say that they're not clear cutting. For example, they're doing whatever abracadabra, rigmarole, sing-songy logging, whatever industry word you want to insert there, whatever they're calling it. But if the outcomes are the same as with clear cutting, then that's what's important. So we look for elements that have ecological value, such as biodiversity, hydrological cycles, natural succession, wildlife habitat, standing and fallen dead trees, soil structure, microorganisms, and fungi, and we see if they're preserved and to what extent. So a little bit about the 3-zone forest management framework. Michelle mentioned this. Under our proposal, there are 3 levels of forest management. Zone 1 is the primary forest conservation zone. No logging or other extractive human activities. Zone 2 is a zone for the ecological restoration of previously logged, eroded, or degraded lands. No logging in Zone 2. Zone 3 is the forestry zone, and that's for partial cutting, timber extraction, consisting of previously industrial logged and eroded lands. A little bit more about the Zone 1. So this zone conserves forests with the highest levels of biodiversity and the highest levels of climate change resilience that produce the highest quality water in moderate flows throughout the year. These forests will be removed from the timber harvesting land base. Natural disturbances are allowed to proceed in this zone because they are important ecological processes. Both Michelle and Herb talked about that. Traditional practices, e.g., ecocultural practices, will be encouraged in these lands. Zone 2, the restoration zone. Again, removal from the timber harvesting land base. No logging. Restoration forests include watersheds with cumulative risks to water supplies, fish habitat, human habitation, and hydrogeological function. It includes lands necessary to act as corridors between islands of primary forest, that's zone 1, that may be improved for wildlife cover, safe movement, migration, and gene flow. Extensive levels of restoration are needed over extended periods of time. I'm going to talk about post-disturbance logging in a moment. Zone 3, the forestry zone. So this guy right here, that's Stan Swinarchuk. He's one of the retired loggers with our group. And he did some crappy logging in his younger days, and he knows it. And he spent a lot of time trying to educate people on doing logging better. The forestry zone is a zone for nature-directed stewardship partial cutting. The timber extraction has to occur under the principles and standards of nature-directed stewardship. The foresters must be trained in nature-directed stewardship, so there's where the education piece comes in. Ecological limits to logging must be identified and followed. Okay, post-disturbance logging, often called salvage logging, is logging after insects, disease, or fire. It will not be practiced in Zone 1 or Zone 2, and only in limited parts of Zone 3, the forestry zone. So this quote here in the red there, fire and pest outbreaks are not reduced by salvage logging. They're made worse by salvage logging. That's from Dr. Dominic Della Sala, who spoke in a video that was broadcast by Conservation North. It's called Gaming the System, and it's available on YouTube. Sorry, it's called Gaming the Ecosystem. Priority 2 is community-centered decision-making. Who wants to have a say in what's happening in the forest around them? Almost everybody? Everybody? Yeah. So we're talking about a recentering of forestry decision-making that provides for the public and Indigenous people to share in decision-making at all levels of planning and management. Indigenous peoples will participate in decisions through being part of the government agency that oversees the administration of the new Forest Act. And I want to point out that we're using the term Indigenous peoples here so that those who are not part of the First Nations or band council structures, those that have traditional knowledge, are also included here. Unfortunately, quite often the person who is sent to represent Indigenous interests in government meetings is an industrial forester. Top goals for priority 2, protect the public interest by empowering local people and Indigenous peoples to make decisions about the natural world surrounding them. To facilitate a diverse range of forest activities, including ecosystem protection, that focus on community needs. To ensure that forest resources are managed for the long-term good of the people, not the corporations. Okay, this diagram right here is in our proposal. I'm gonna come back to it in a moment. It looks pretty complicated, but I just want to point out that big green box there is the community forest boards. So the structure, support, and relationships are centered around those community forest boards, and it's happening under the principles of nature-directed stewardship. Come back to that in a minute. But first I want to talk a little bit more about the features of community forest boards. So they will be legislated under the new Forest Act. The duties, they will oversee forest management for local land and watersheds. The people, they are comprised of local people and local Indigenous peoples who are impacted by decisions about the land. Decision-making, again, that's local people and local Indigenous people. Loyalty, they give undivided loyalty and allegiance to the people. The science is guided and advised by independent science panels and Indigenous knowledge panels. Indigenous knowledge and traditions are incorporated into forest management and planning. The local economy is prioritized. Community-based economic development is the priority. They take cultural and community values into consideration, including those of Indigenous people. Okay, so alongside the community forest boards, the CFBs, we have the supporting entities. We've got science panels, which are made up of people, say, like Michelle and Herb. We've got Indigenous knowledge panels. We've got local ranger stations and regional log sort yards. The yellow box above is regional committees, which is comprised of MLAs and regional Indigenous representatives. They're there to support community forest boards, not to give top-down orders. And then up on the right there, we've got my right, your left. We've got the Ministry of Ecological Integrity. And that will evolve out of the current Ministry of Forests, which will be jointly managed by BC bureaucrats and Indigenous peoples. So don't worry, bureaucrats, there's still jobs for you. It includes an expanded forest research branch, all intended to support nature-directed stewardship and community forest boards. So the Forester General, up in the blue box, monitors and reports on the application of nature-directed stewardship, and reports to and receives feedback from the public and Indigenous people. The Forester General is an independent office like the current Auditor General, nonpartisan. Okay, that takes us to priority 3, which is community-based economies. To facilitate the development of stable, diverse, ecologically sustainable, community-based economies, the government eliminates corporate monopolies and instead incentivizes and supports small to medium-sized businesses doing 1, local forestry, conservation, and restoration work that follows a nature-directed stewardship approach, and 2, non-forestry, nature-based industries. The goals for this priority are to minimize extraction and get the most value from the lowest possible harvest by switching forest products from an emphasis on raw logs, pellets, dimension lumber, and fiber to value-added products. So that's the forestry part. The second part here is to facilitate the development of non-forestry, nature-centered industries that depend on intact forests and primary forests, including tourism, especially ecotourism, subsistence economies, non-timber forest products, and Indigenous guardians programs. There are a lot of ways new jobs are created under the new Forest Act and NDS. There's more detail on this in our report. Because we require a better understanding of ecosystems and how to protect them under NDS, there's more jobs in data collection, research, analysis, science, planning, management. So research nerds should be happy with this. This is a good thing. People who like to be managers, here you go. There's more local jobs by decentralizing forest management. We get community forest boards, which will not be made up of volunteers. They'll be paid. Regional log sort yards, Indigenous knowledge panels, regional science panels. We got more local forest offices again. So monitoring once again becomes a public sector function. So we bring the forest rangers back. We also have Indigenous guardians and Indigenous stewardship. Small business and entrepreneurship will multiply by selling timber through regional log sort yards. People are curious about that. I'm not going to go into it in this presentation, but we have more detail in our report on it. There'll also be value-added products, which will be available to local people. Okay, so here's an example of community-centered forestry following nature-directed stewardship principles for the most part, that's both profitable and supplies local jobs. The Harriet Proctor Community Forest, which is east of Nelson, BC, creates over 6 to 7 times the number of forestry jobs than conventional forestry in British Columbia. And in addition to their logging operation, they also have a mill which produces a variety of wood products, including value-added flooring, paneling, and wood siding, which can be sold to local residents and businesses. So there's examples of this already being done. It's not some big mystery that nobody can figure out how to do. Right, so that's all the forestry stuff. But most of all, protecting and conserving forests will open up opportunities for developing and expanding other industries, including the nature-based tourism sector, as well as subsistence economies, non-timber forest products, and Indigenous guardians programs. If it's preserved, BC offers a wealth of world-class natural landscapes and unique biodiversity that provide communities with sources of ecological, sociocultural, and economic value that have nothing to do with extracting timber. There's a direct relationship between conservation action and economic diversification for communities. And there's evidence of that. We've got just some of it in our proposal. So here's a look. I just wanted to give an example of some of the numbers of why tourism is important economically. And I put all of the references actually on this slide because people were questioning at the last presentation where I got these numbers. So tourism jobs in 2022 in BC provided 154,000 jobs. Forestry in 2021 provided 55,000 jobs. And then if you look down there, see, according to Kofi, the number in 2024 is down to 49,000 direct forestry jobs. So it's going down. GDP, tourism provides 7.2 billion. Forestry provides 5.9 billion. Revenues. So I couldn't get an exact apples to apples comparison for tourism and forestry, but according to Destination BC, tourism supplies 18.5 billion, including money received by businesses, individuals, and the government. And then according to the BC budget, forests, not forestry, but they call it forests, provided 1.893 billion. That's just for the government. Expenses for the government, the BC government, from tourism, 427 million in 2023. And then dun, 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 dun. Expenses forestry, 1.075 billion. There's a big difference for fewer jobs. Okay, so at this point in time, the right political decision, it doesn't even have to be brave at this point, that the BC government can take on behalf of citizens and Indigenous people is to take back control of public lands from private companies. And it has to be addressed now for the sake of public safety, for the BC economy, and so that our children have a future. In our report, in the backgrounder, I believe we have the declining levels of harvesting in British Columbia. They're going down already. So we have to take this by the reins and steer it in the direction that we want it to go. Right, so how do we get there? It's a lovely vision. Nothing changes until the legislation changes. So the first step, people across BC have to start pushing for the same thing. So right now there's thousands of people asking for forestry problems in their local regions to be fixed. And this is important. But without a change to the legislation, nobody's going to get very far. So we all have to start pushing for the same thing. So we're recommending one of the avenues that we're taking is grassroots lobbying in a more organized way. So here's an example of one way to do it. Get together with 3 or 4 people. Prepare a short presentation, 10 minutes. One person tells the story of personal impact. So we heard from an MLA, Adam Walker, on Vancouver Island, and he told us, we did a role play with him. He said, tell the politician a personal story. Politicians are people too. Make sure they can relate to you. Person number 2 presents the briefing note. So we have a 2-page briefing note on our website. It's in the same place as the Forest Act proposal and the backgrounder. And then one person asks for the commitment. The commitment that we're asking for right now prior to the election is, and this is on the briefing note, all provincial MLA candidates in the 2024 election are requested to present this proposal to your party, your riding organizations, and your constituents using the new Forest Act proposal and backgrounder submitted to you by the Power of Forest campaigners. Are you going to get that commitment? What do you think? Yeah? No? Yeah? Green Party? Yeah, so you might get some polite listening. Even if you don't get a commitment from your MLA, you're planting a seed. And we have to start doing that. So try and book an in-person appointment with your MLA because they'll remember that more. And then schedule a follow-up phone call and ask, hey, how's it going with that, reading that proposal? And then book another in-person appointment. So here's another thing that I heard from an MLA on Vancouver Island. He said 100 letters from people in the same region about the same thing to an MLA will get their attention. 100 letters. Handwritten letters get even more attention because they're so unusual nowadays. And he swore to me, this was Adam Walker, an independent MLA, he said, yes, we do pay attention. So prior to the Vancouver or the Nanaimo event, the hotel I was staying at happened to be having an NDP reception. They had some jazz music. They were like dancing and singing and stuff. And it was for a guy named George Anderson, who's an NDP candidate. And I happened to see George in the hall, and I walked up to him and I said, hey, can I get your email? I want to send you this new Forest Act we're working on. And he said, oh yeah, you guys are making the tour. You guys are on our radar. And that surprised me. So they are listening and they are paying attention. So get in your politician's face. And also invite your politicians to meetings, events, and presentations. Local politicians are important too. I recently got a copy of a letter from a lobby group, an industry lobby group called Forestry that they sent to the Nanaimo City Council, asking them to ask the province to relax some policies and laws. So they're lobbying your local council, and we have to do that too. Make presentations to council meetings. Meet your local politicians. Okay, what are some elephants in the room I haven't talked about yet when it comes to policy and decision making? Shout it out. Yes. A large lobby group of voters. Yeah. Okay. I was thinking of, that's a good one. I was thinking of another one. Starts with a B. Those guys. They have an influence on policy and decision making. They advise MLAs on the issues. They meet with MLAs regularly. What's another one?
Voter apathy.
Voter apathy, yeah. So we got lots of voters getting together. We got voter apathy. There's another one, starts with an L. These guys. Yeah, so industry lobbyists. So yeah, I agree. We need a grassroots lobby, organized, strategic. We need money. And that's one of the things that I'm looking to work on at the end of this tour. Put something together with other people who want to be involved in it. The thing about lobbyists and bureaucrats is quite often they're the same people. Lobbyists and bureaucrats cycle in and out of those jobs. Okay, thank you. That was a lot. So my aim was to introduce you to the new Forest Act and inspire you to join the campaign. So how can you take action if you don't want to be a lobbyist? In one way or another, you can donate. That helps us a lot. Money makes things happen. You could also read the proposal, write letters, share it with your friends and neighbors, spread the word. We're planting seeds. That's where we start. We plant seeds. Okay, let's open it up for questions now.
You're filming this. Will there be a shareable thing that I can post that, because everyone should see this. I mean, like I said, voter apathy, but people go, But if you give them something easy to watch, as opposed to something to read, because I write posts and it's got a lot of good information. People go, too many words, can't be bothered. There you go, little books, have lots of words in it, but people read books. But just, I want to be able to get this message out to as many people as possible. So will there be a shareable version?
All of these are being recorded, and each individual presentation will be a separate recording. We'll put it on YouTube, social media. We'll send it out via email. If you signed up for this thing today, you'll get copies of not only the ones that happened here today, but also the other presentations. Yeah.
Questions for Michelle and her too.
My question might be better answered by Mike if I throw you under the bus a bit here. We have had an MLA, our current MLA, Mike Morris, who is the person you identified that you want on that slide, right? He meets with us in person, he cares about forests, he gets the big issues, he asks for what needs to be asked for, and he did it for several terms, and you know, like we couldn't even get glyphosate banned out of the Forestry Act. And I realized that's a chipping away at the act, which is not successful, clearly, and this is a better approach. But I am very cynical about changing things from that level because of the elephant in the room that you mentioned, the lobbyists. I mean, it's not a secret that the Canfor lawyers wrote FERPA, right? Bureaucrats did not write FERPA, scientists didn't write FERPA, foresters didn't write FERPA, Canfor lawyers wrote FERPA. So I don't know if either of you three or if Mike has anything to add to the advice bit on what we can do, because the reality is we are not very many years away from a collapse of our entire primary forest ecosystem. So it is very quickly coming to an end, whether we change this or not.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'll say something, and then if Mike wants to add to it, like Herb already mentioned it too, is about culture. We need to keep talking. We need to keep coming together in these kinds of groups. We need to spread the word. We need to go beyond the people in this room and the people in the room at the other presentations that we made. We need to be strategic, and we need to carry on. And one of the things that's happening is I'm talking to someone else who was a lobbyist. So behind the scenes, maybe that person will help me. So this is expanding, this is growing. We have to keep doing this. We have to get to other voters. We have to change the culture. We have to change the conversation. We have to get the information out there. Mike, did you have anything to add, or you guys?
Just the, great presentation from everybody here, and I agree with Jen. We're on a burning platform now, and the end is inevitable. Things will happen whether we do anything or not. One of the strategies, I feel like I've been poking my pencil in my eye here most of the time over the last number of years here, trying to push this forward. But what I subscribe to now is just ensuring that the decision makers are seized with the information. So they can, make sure they get it and it's in writing and or it's recorded or something like that. Because when they become a deputy minister or a minister or whatever position they're going to have in government and the wheels fall off, we can go back and say, 3 years ago, we told you that this was going to happen and you did nothing about it. So just make sure they're seized with the information, but you're doing a great job and keep it up.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I just somebody else had said to me, Douglas, you have a question or comment? Somebody else had said to me, it seemed like in the 90s we were heading in the right direction, and then that fell apart because some industry lawyers got together in a government office and wrote the new Forest and Range Practices Act in the early 2000s. So even if we do create new legislation, well, that could go to shit once again, right? And so that's why we have to work on the culture, and we have to keep having these conversations and getting this information out there.
I love elephants, and equating them to lobbyists, corporate lobbyists, is really hard for me. But I wanted to just mention that one of the biggest things that I have found, that really impacts people about something that they weren't that aware of, and that in the lobbyist game, was Dogwood did a really great expose called the Dirty 30, and basically recorded all the top lobbyists within the last segment of years prior to that report. And the relationship wasn't just in terms of bureaucrats cycling in and out of the lobbyist game, but it was politicians cycling in and out of the lobbyist game. And the number of former NED MLAs, for instance, that were key lobbyists in the government was, I think, with the government was phenomenal. But when I mention that around to people, and people have a chance to check that out, they are really aghast about it. So I think broadcasting that as much as possible, possibly encouraging Dogwood and others to, flesh that out more. Our lobbyist laws now at least, track the amount of number of times and the amount of time that is spent by lobbyists in MLA's offices. So I think it's really important to broadcast that message out because people are shocked by it.
One idea that I had is if we raise enough money, maybe we could hire them to be on our side. Some of those lobbyists.
Thank you very much for this. It's a beautiful vision, and you've put together a lot of the ingredients for a cake that, if baked properly, would taste differently. For many of us that have watched environmental initiatives die on the vine, I think we've realized early on that the most important thing you can do as a leader for an initiative like this is to anticipate how your asks will be used against you. And I'd just like to bring two examples to bear. The first has to do with your 3-zone system. It sounds lovely. However, ecosystems have a behavior with tipping points. So there's a certain amount of land that must be allocated to each of those zones to obtain the outcome you want. And on top of that, you can allocate the right amount, but if you don't put it in the right places, you can also lose. So I guess what I'm saying is principles of landscape ecology have to be brought to bear. And of course, Herb is an excellent person to be involved in that. The second way you can imagine how this could be used against you has to do with who administers those different zones. We live in a world where legally certain professionals are designated towards different types of responsibilities. And by far, the province of British Columbia is populated by registered professional foresters. And as somebody that went through much of that training, I can tell you that they're brainwashed into a set of beliefs which do not prepare them to engage in things like ecological restoration, which is one of the prime things that you want to achieve here. So I think those types of details, although within a large vision seem almost superfluous, are the ways your ship gets sunk.
That's excellent. Thank you very much. And like I mentioned, it's a living document, so we need to flesh it out more and put stuff in like that. So thank you for those suggestions. We'll talk some more. Alex, yeah.
For everybody, it's kind of two pieces in it. It's based on myths. Whether I win or lose, the idea is to expose some myths to the public. And one of them, I've talked about David Rollins before. Forestry definitely doesn't pay the bills, folks. I get people saying, how are we going to fund education and infrastructure? And I go, we don't fund that now. Like, people have this idea that forestry gives us a bunch of money to use for services, and really the numbers show that it doesn't. So for one thing is it true to say that it costs us money to allow corporations to cut down our trees and degrade our environment? Is that a true statement?
Yes.
Thank you. Because I've used it before and people go, that's not right. And I go, well, that's true. It's from as far as I see, that it's costing us money. And that's an important point to tie with this, because if we're spending money to let them destroy our environment, why wouldn't we take control of our resources and do it ecologically and economically for the people who actually own it, which are the citizens of British Columbia? Why wouldn't we do that? I think people need to know that we're not making money out of forestry. And the other myth is carbon. I get a lot of people feeding back the idea of carbon sequestration, and you've talked about that, Herb, and the importance of the irretrievable carbon that we lose from cutting stuff down. But people still go, carbon's important, we need more carbon, and carbon's been around forever, and we're a carbon-based people. Like, we use carbon as a bad thing, and other people say, no, carbon's a good thing. So what's the talking point to convince people that we're losing our ability to sequester carbon by what we're doing to our lands? But it's just frustrating to hear the same old conspiracy theories thrown back again.
Well, there's a lot there. I'd start with teaching people what photosynthesis is. And in the absence of photosynthesis, we're all in trouble, big trouble. So, and we're busily cutting down the ecosystems that are amongst the best, certainly in terms of their extent, in providing for carbon capture and storage. And so the more we let that loose, the more we've got a greenhouse gas situation. We already know, and we can explain that to people, that the problems that we're experiencing now are locked in for 2 or 3 centuries forward. Those kinds of things need more airtime for people, and there needs to be a clear link made between those problems and what we're doing in land use. So that's it.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I could add one more thing about carbon. I've worked in the field of kind of carbon in forests for a few years, and I find because carbon is kind of an abstraction, it's really difficult for people to understand it. And so I find graphical representations kind of help. And I know a person who's developing illustrations that properly communicate how carbon in forests actually works and confronts all the myths that industry is promulgating about carbon in forests and how it all works. So I'm eagerly awaiting those to come out. We don't have those skills internally to actually draw those things, so I'm really glad that an expert who understands how it works.
Oh boy.
Yeah, just briefly, if I may, I just wanted to point out that certain term words we use need to be, require some certain level of carefulness, I suppose. For example, integrating indigenous knowledge on one of your slides. That implies basically what if indigenous knowledge is what basically we're categorizing, taking indigenous knowledge and incorporating into already been existing, pretty scientifically based knowledge-based system, paradigm, and that maybe that's not really right term we want to be using, because what if they want their knowledge-based system to be equal, maybe even guiding the trouble policy we're in right now, right? So I just wanted to point out that it's not integrating their knowledge into existing system maybe, but it has to have equal level of recognition for both existing system versus new indigenous knowledge system.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that perspective. Herb, did you want to comment at all?
I don't know. I can't really add much to that.
Yeah, no, did you want to add? No, I'm good. Yeah, no, but thank you for that. I really appreciate that perspective.
I think you've packed a lot of information into this session, and it's been great to listen to it. I'm just wondering, where should we go next? How do we move this whole initiative forward?
That is the question. And so one of the things that we've been talking about is after we've got 2 more stops on the tour, is having a meeting, some small gatherings of people who want to be directly involved, people who want to volunteer. We'll get more ideas because we do have to create a strategy. So the strategy has to include, where does the money come from? How much money do we need? what is the next step and how much money do we need? Like money, right? But we had to have money to get this piece going. We need money for the next piece. So strategy meetings, I think, is the next step. And also just encouraging people to do their individual piece by taking the proposal to their MLAs. And maybe some people might consider waiting until after the election. The election, I keep hearing about, well, things might change after the election. What we've tried to do here is to create something that stands the test of time. So that's why we've incorporated the economic aspect into it. So after the election, everyone continues taking this stuff to their MLAs and their local politicians. And that has to be part of our strategy too. And we're looking for suggestions. So if you have suggestions, bring them on. Thank you for that.
I really like what you've done. I think you've got a lot of great ideas. In thinking about taking this back to my forest community, I'm hearing what the response would be. And I think it would be, oh great, we're gonna go from really high-paying jobs that sustain families, forestry jobs, where rural people don't have to go away to school for 2 to 4 years. You're out of high school, you're making the big bucks, to tourism jobs, chambermaids, waitresses, people filling gas tanks. So again, there's going to be jobs, but they're going to be university jobs, or there's going to be jobs and they're going to be low-paying jobs that we can't find people to work at right now. So how would you respond to that?
That is a really good question. I'm glad that you asked. I'm going to say a little bit and then maybe Herb can add to it. So it's not just the top jobs and the bottom job, like however you want, like the university level education or the non-trained person jobs. There's all that stuff in between. So we've got, right now, forestry, like I pointed out, doesn't supply that high of a percentage of jobs in BC. So we can shift on the ground type jobs into regional log sort yards. So I didn't talk very much about that, but there's a lot of sort of, let's say a guy who drives a skid steer loader to work at the regional log sort yards. There's going to be hand scaling type jobs. Harrop Proctor Community Forest, which has a mill, they already proved they're providing 6 to 7 times the number of jobs that industrial forestry provides in BC. And those are the kind of like guy wearing a hard hat, wearing the vest kind of jobs that they want, right? So it's going to take some time to transition over to that model, but all of those kind of forester kind of jobs are going to happen. The equipment won't be the giant feller bunchers. It'll be smaller equipment that it makes a lighter touch on the land when it comes to the actual places where forestry is being done. We've also got conservation jobs and the restoration jobs. I'm going to actually let Herb talk a little bit more about maybe some of the restoration type jobs and whatever else you wanted to add.
Yeah, I'll start by saying we don't want to underestimate the need to abolish the tenure system, because the tenure system is what's diverting most of the money that comes from forests into corporate shareholders' hands. So instead of going to communities, it's going to corporations. And to many people, in many cases, that don't even live in this province, and in some cases this country. So don't underestimate what would be freed up in terms of money for jobs by eliminating the tenure system. And so the other thing, when you talk about restoration, keep in mind that the government's already spending $365 million a year to prop up the timber industry. $365 million is a conservative estimate too, I would say. I think David Rodden did a good job. I had a chance to review the numbers, and in my opinion, he was very cautious in putting out that number. So if we end those subsidies, all of a sudden you've got a nice pot of money there to do different things, from restoration to building nature-directed stewardship plans, to training people to get away from the bias that Jeff mentioned earlier about the training of foresters. So, and those will open up a lot of jobs. The Harrop Proctor Community Forest is one that I'm very familiar with. We did the initial plan for it, and I've reviewed their work through the years. It's totally possible to replicate that. And so the 6 to 7 times as many jobs per tree cut or logging truckload, whatever, however you want to look at it, is totally possible. And so that ends up being, you could create the same number of jobs that we create now with something in the order of 20% of the cut that's happening in forests. That's another place where we can not only protect forests, but provide a lot of good community-based jobs.
Can I just add one more thing? Thank you very much. And I just wanted to bring up another thing in regards to tourism that someone asked at one of the other talks. People on Vancouver Island don't want more tourists there. And so one of the things that I wanted to clarify is that all the stuff that's going to happen in the forests has to happen under ecological principles. So we're not talking about just making changes to the way that foresters do their jobs, but a change to the way that forest management is done. And so if somebody comes along and they make a proposal for a cat ski operation that's going to damage or destroy bear dens in the winter, the answer to that proposal is no, because it doesn't align with the principles of ecological management and nature-directed stewardship. So we're not talking about bringing in a bunch of helicopter skiing and all that sort of thing. The focus should be on ecotourism done in a way that's respectful to nature.
I gave a presentation to a group of forestry students from here during the summer. And one of the things that I pointed out was we are told over and over and over again how forestry is a renewable resource and it is sustainably harvested. And then I said, but how come the mills are shutting down because they can't get fiber? There's something wrong with this picture. You know, all of the forestry students, they just kind of stared at me with the blank look on their face saying, huh, never thought of that. And I think the vast majority of the public is like that, but even worse. When you said it was 2% of the GPS in the province, I was surprised because I thought it was 6. That was a few years ago. Most people think it's 50. Most people think logging and the forest industry is 50% of our GPS. So the question is, how do we get this message to the general public, the ones who are going about their business, doing their thing, minding their own? And when it comes to ecologically sustainable forestry, people think that's what we're doing right now, because we get told that over and over and over. Yeah. Renewable and sustainable and forests for tomorrow and all the other stuff. People think that is what we're doing, and they don't understand how far off the mark that is. So when it comes to how do you get to the public to educate them with the data, I would suggest we have a very good system for doing that. It's called the education system. And there's two sort of entries into that system. One is called the Professional Development Day for teachers. They're always looking for stuff that they can learn that they don't already know. If some of these presentations, very good presentations that you guys did, were offered on a Professional Development Day to teachers, that would be a really good way to get some information out there. If you call it the power of forests, and remove that protecting communities underneath there and have a subtitle that says, what your students will experience with our forest system, something along that line. I think there'd be a pretty good handle to get into the public that way. And there is no better way to get information to the public than the education system. The second approach is the education system now has a mandate that students have to be taken outside. They can't sit in the classroom all day, every day, all year. There's a mandate that says they have to get hands-on things. And sadly, the teachers have a really tough time saying, what the heck am I going to do with this class? Because what am I going to do with it that works? If they get offered a field trip out into a piece of forest where we'll walk around and talk about the things that are going on here, there's a huge, huge appetite for that in the education system. And they'll even provide you with a bus to take the class and yourself to wherever that we can present some of this data. So that's my recommendation, my suggestion for next steps is use the education system.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you very much. And I invite anyone who's watching or listening to contact me if you're involved in the education system. Please help us out. That's my email. You can email me at boundaryforest@gmail.com. And I also wanted to follow that up by saying there's something called, I think it's called National Forest Week, and it's an industry sponsored thing, and they're going into schools and they're capturing them. So I agree, we need to get them early. Did you guys want to add anything? No?
I just wanted to mention another way of getting the word out, and I forget if it's Dogwood or Lead Now, invites the public to write petitions, and they send it out to all their members with the information of what the petition's about, and then for people to sign on, and it might get distributed to MLAs or wherever you want it to get distributed to. But just on that, I was wondering if all the principles that you're talking about, can that be spread Canada-wide? I know your presentation, I think, is specifically for BC, but for Lead Now or Dogwood, it would go right across the country. Would it be appropriate?
Herb, do you know much about the forestry laws, Michelle, either one of you in other provinces? No.
The curious thing about if you look Canada-wide and you use Canada, Government of Canada statistics, is that BC has by and large the highest quality forests across the country and produces the fewest jobs per volume of wood cut. It varies a little bit between provinces that way, but other than the eastern provinces, which have higher levels of manufacturing, where they produce, because of that, more jobs per volume of wood cut. The rest of them are pretty much on par with BC. But even the ones that produce more jobs through more manufacturing processes are using the same destructive methods. If you look at area logged and how much has been clear cut versus partially cut or protected, they're in the same boat, or in some cases even worse than we are. Worse because in many of those provinces in the east, they have much poorer quality forest soils and harsher climates for trees to grow in. So it wouldn't take much to adapt what we've been talking about here today to be a Canada-wide vision at all.
Excellent. Okay, does anybody have any other formal questions? And then we'll wrap it up. And just before we go, we'll stick around for one-on-one conversations for anybody who wants